Mafia boss chases struggling woman who stole his wallet, only to discover truth that silences him. The cold November air of Harbor City was a physical weight. Pressing against Elena Marlowe's thin jacket, it smelled of salt, diesel, and the exhaust from the luxury cars idling outside La Sirena. The restaurant's entrance glowed, a warm, golden rectangle spilling light and the faint sound of laughter onto the dark pavement. Elena huddled in the alcove of a closed bookstore 2 doors down, shrinking into the shadows, her hands jammed deep into her pockets. One hand was numb from the cold, the other clutched a crumpled, tear-dampened prescription slip. She was not a thief. She was a file clerk, a big sister and a daughter. But the temp agency had stopped calling. Her last paycheck was 2 weeks gone, and Lucy's cough had returned, this time with a rattling, terrifying persistence. The prescription for the new medication cost $465, a figure so impossible it might as well have been $1 million. Elena was broke, heartsick, and emotionally hollowed out. All she had left was a final, desperate, terrible idea. She'd been standing here for an hour, watching the patrons of La Sirena, men in dark, tailored suits and women in coats that probably cost more than her apartment's yearly rent. She watched them laugh, their teeth white and perfect, as they handed their keys to the valet, her stomach clenched with a mixture of hunger and resentment. She was looking for a mark, someone careless, someone laughing too hard, someone whose wallet would be an afterthought, easily lifted from a pocket or a purse. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a sick, frantic rhythm just this once. She promised herself, just enough for Lucy, a black sedan, polished to a mirror shine, pulled up. The valet, usually so poised, seemed to snap to a new level of attention. He opened the rear passenger door. A man emerged, Elena's breath caught. He wasn't like the others. The others were loud, performing their wealth. This man was silent. He moved with a fluid, contained grace that seemed to pull the light toward him. He was tall. Dressed in a black suit so perfectly cut, it looked more like an extension of him than clothing. His dark hair was swept back, and as he turned to speak to his driver, the light from the restaurant caught the sharp, aristocratic line of his jaw. He was not handsome in the way of movie stars. His face was too severe, his stillness too intimidating. He looked, Elena thought with a shiver, like a panther in tailored clothing. He clapped his driver on the shoulder, shared a quiet word, and the man inside the car laughed. The tall man smiled, a brief, genuine flash that transformed his face, making it suddenly, shockingly magnetic. He turned and walked toward the restaurant entrance, alone. His overcoat was unbuttoned, and as he passed under the gas lamp, Elena saw it. The coat shifted, and for a fraction of a second, the back pocket of his trousers was visible, the rectangular bulge of a leather wallet pressing against the fine wool. It was insane. He was the most dangerous-looking person she had seen all night. But he was also distracted, walking with the easy confidence of a man who had never had to look over his shoulder. Elena's body moved before her mind could object. It was a decision made of pure, animal desperation. She pushed off from the alcove, her worn sneakers silent on the pavement. She timed it perfectly, angling her path to intersect his just as he reached for the restaurant's heavy oak door. She stumbled, a pathetic, convincing little gasp. "Oh, I'm so sorry." She collided with his side, her body brushing against the solid, immovable wall of his chest. Her fingers, small and quick, dove into his pocket. The leather was smooth, heavy. She had it. Her hand was out, the wallet vanishing into the deep pocket of her own jacket. In less than a second, "My fault," she mumbled, not looking up, keeping her head down, her hair falling to hide her face. He didn't move. He just stopped. She could feel the heat radiating from him, the faint, clean scent of expensive soap and something cold, like winter air. She pulled back. "Sorry," and scrambled away, forcing herself to walk, not run, toward the corner. Every nerve in her body screamed. Her skin prickled where she had touched him. Dominic Villaro stopped with his hand on the restaurant door. The collision had been nothing. a small, trembling woman bumping into him, but the instant she touched him, he felt it. A fractional change in weight, a whisper-light touch at his back pocket that was not his own. He stood perfectly still for a count of 3. The woman was already 10 feet away, speed walking. He turned, slowly. His driver, watching from the sedan, saw the turn and tensed. "Ma'am," Dominic called out. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the street noise like a blade. The woman froze for half a second. Then she bolted. The mask of civility dropped from Dominic's face. He didn't shout for his men. He didn't reach for a weapon. He simply moved. He launched from the sidewalk, his long, powerful legs devouring the pavement. Elena ran. She had never run so fast in her life. She ducked into the alley she had scouted earlier, her lungs already burning. She heard him behind her, the heavy, rhythmic slap of expensive shoes on concrete. He wasn't running. He was hunting. He was impossibly fast. She burst out of the alley onto a side street, shoving past a couple walking their dog. "Sorry." The subway entrance was a block away, a gaping mouth promising escape. She could hear him, closer now. She didn't dare look back. She threw herself down the concrete steps, her hand fumbling in her pocket for a token she didn't have. She slammed her hip against the turnstile, the metal bar unmoving. "No, no, no," she whimpered, tears of panic blurring her vision. She heard his shoes on the steps. With a sob of desperation, Elena put her hands on the top of the turnstile and vaulted over it, her body clumsy but fueled by adrenaline. She landed hard, her ankle twisting, but she didn't stop. A train was screeching into the station. The doors slid open. "Hey!" a voice yelled behind her. Not his, a transit cop. She ignored it, sprinting for the open doors. She threw herself into the car just as the chime sounded. The doors slid shut, sealing her in. Elena collapsed against the glass, her chest heaving. She looked back at the platform. He was there, standing just on the other side of the turnstile, not even breathing hard. The transit cop was talking to him, gesturing at her, but the tall man ignored him. His gaze was locked on her, through the dirty glass of the subway car. He wasn't angry. His face was calm, intense, and unreadable. He was simply watching. As the train began to pull away, he tilted his head, a small, curious gesture. He was memorizing her. The train plunged into the darkness of the tunnel, but Elena could still see his face, his eyes. She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the filthy floor, pulled the heavy wallet from her pocket, and burst into silent, terrified tears. Dominic stood on the platform until the train's red lights disappeared. The transit cop was still blustering. "Sir, did you want to file a report? She jumped the gate, and I saw her running from you. Did she assault you?" Dominic turned his gaze on the officer. The cop's words dried up. "No," Dominic said. His voice was a low rumble. "We were just playing a game." He turned and ascended the stairs, emerging back into the cold night air. His driver, Sal, had the car waiting, the door open. "La Serena, boss." "No, back to the office," Dominic said, sliding into the back seat. "Everything all right? You look—" Sal searched for the word. "She was fast," Dominic said, almost to himself, staring at the city lights blurring past. "And she was scared to death, but she did it anyway." He had not been pickpocketed since he was a teenager. Before he was Dominic Villaro, he was surrounded by men who would kill for him, who anticipated his every need. The city bent to his will, and this wisp of a girl, with terrified eyes and hands that moved like lightning, had slipped through his defenses and taken something from him. It was not the money. He had $50,000 in custom suits and $1 million in art in his penthouse. The few hundred in his wallet were meaningless. It was the audacity, the boldness, and the fear. The combination was intoxicating. Back in his penthouse office, which overlooked the glittering, dark expanse of Harbor City, his second in command, Marco, was waiting with a glass of scotch. "Rough night. Dom?" Dominic took the glass but didn't drink. "Someone lifted my wallet." Marco's jaw dropped. "What? Who? I'll have his hands?" "It was a woman," Dominic interrupted. Walking to the wall of glass, he looked down at the city, at the thousands of little lives scurrying below. pull the security footage from La Serena's front door, and the street cameras on 4th and Harbor, then check the subway station at Harbor and Main. Boss, for a pickpocket? Marco was baffled. I can just cancel your cards. She didn't take them for the cards. Marco? Dominic finally took a sip of the scotch. The fiery liquid did nothing to warm the strange coldness in his chest. She was running for her life, but she wasn't a professional. She was desperate. He replayed the moment, the brush of her body, the almost soundless apology, the panicked flight, and those eyes in the subway, wide, dark, and full of a terror that went beyond getting caught. I want to find her, Dominic said, his voice quiet. To make an example? Marco asked. Already planning? No, Dominic said, turning from the window. His eyes were dark, unreadable. I'm curious. The footage was grainy, but it was her. He watched it over and over, the way she tucked herself into the shadows, the moment she decided, the flawless execution of the lift, the chase, and then the subway platform. He paused the frame, zooming in on her face as she looked back at him through the glass. He was stunned by the force of the emotional pull he felt. It was not anger. It was not arousal. It was a deep, resonant recognition. A loneliness in her that called to a loneliness in him. He was obsessed. Miles away, in a tenement building that smelled of boiled cabbage and damp, Elena counted the cash on her kitchen table. There were $740. Her hands were shaking so hard she kept losing count. Elle? A small voice called from the other room. Elena quickly wiped her eyes and swept the money into her pocket. She walked into the tiny, freezing bedroom, forcing a smile. Lucy was awake, her small face pale and sweaty in the dim glow of the nightlight. Did you go out? It's late. Just had to get some air, Elena lied, sitting on the edge of the cot and brushing the damp hair from her sister's forehead. How are you feeling? My chest hurts, Lucy whispered. Elena's smile faltered. I know, baby. I know. But guess what? I'm going to get your new medicine tomorrow. The special kind, and it's going to make you feel all better. Promise? I promise, Elena said, her voice thick. She held Lucy's small, hot hand until her sister's breathing evened out in sleep. Then she went back to the kitchen, laid her head on the table, and shook. The wallet was still on the table. She opened it, pulling out the driver's license. Dominic Villaro. The address was in the sky, a penthouse on the absurdly wealthy side of the river. The next day, she filled the prescription. The relief as she held the small, white paper bag was so profound it made her knees weak. She bought groceries, real groceries, chicken, oranges, a small bar of chocolate for Lucy. She met her friend Mira for a quick coffee at the diner where Mira worked. You look better, Mira said, sliding a cup across the counter. Land a new gig? Something like that, Elena said, evasive. She pulled out the wallet. Have you ever heard of this guy? Mira wiped her hands on her apron and looked at the ID. Her face went white. She dropped the coffee pot she was holding, and it shattered, splashing hot coffee across the floor. Mira, what's wrong? Elena? Mira's voice was a terrified hiss. Where did you get this? I found it. Liar, Mira snapped, grabbing Elena's wrist. Oh, God, Elle, do you have any idea who this is? This is Dominic Villaro. He's not just some rich guy. He's from Harbor City, the docks, the unions, the parts of the city the cops don't go. They say he had a man thrown off the harbor bridge for looking at his car wrong. Elena's blood ran cold. Did he see you? I don't know. I think so, Elena whispered, remembering the eyes in the subway. You have to go, Mira said, her hands shaking as she swept up the broken porcelain. Take Lucy and get on a bus. Go anywhere. If he knows you're the one who took this, he'll find you. And men like him don't just take their wallet back. They take everything. Elena left the diner, her heart pounding a new, terrified rhythm. But she couldn't leave. Lucy was too sick to travel. And where would they go? She had no money left, not after the medicine and the groceries. She just had to disappear. She was a nobody. He was a king. He would forget. He had to. Dominic did not forget. His men were good. They lost her at the subway, But they were patient. If she's that broke, she's not going far, Marco reasoned. She lives there. They canvassed the blocks around the station. 2 days later, they got a hit. A laundromat owner recognized the picture. Yeah, she comes in sometimes. Late. Always pays in cash. Looks tired. They found her building. Dominic sat in the back of his black sedan, parked 2 streets over, for an entire night. He watched. He learned. He saw her leave at 6 in the morning, her face a mask of exhaustion, to stand in line at the temp office. He saw her return at noon, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The next night, he moved to an empty apartment his organization kept in the building across the street. He sat in the dark with a pair of military-grade binoculars. He saw her through the thin, grimy window of her 3rd-floor apartment. He saw the small, sick child in the cot. He watched Elena bathe her sister's face with a washcloth, her movements full of a tenderness that made his chest tighten. He watched her read from a worn-out children's book, her voice animated, trying to bring joy into the cold, sparse room. He watched her sit at the kitchen table after the girl was asleep, her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking in a silent cry. This was not a thief. This was not a disrespectful brat. This was a warrior, fighting a battle he couldn't comprehend, and losing. His curiosity was now something else entirely. It was a raw, protective, and confusing instinct. He wanted to storm that apartment, not to punish her, but to fix it, to stop her from crying. He had built an empire on cold, hard logic. Emotions were a liability. But watching her, he felt the foundations of his world shift. He could not go to her. He would terrify her. He would terrify that little girl. The thought of that child looking at him with fear made him feel sick. So he made a different plan. He returned to his car and took a thick, white envelope from the glove compartment. He sealed it. Inside was $5,000 in cash. He walked to her building, slipped past the broken security door, and climbed the 3 flights of stairs. Her apartment door was thin, the wood splintered near the lock. He could hear the faint sound of the child coughing. He knelt, slid the envelope under the door, and stood. He listened for a moment. Silence. He walked away, his face a mask of stone. He wasn't just curious anymore. He had left a piece of bait. He wanted to see if the woman who fed her sister before she ate, the woman who cried in silence, was the same one who had the nerve to steal from him. He would wait. He would watch. And he was stunned to realize, as he stepped back out into the cold harbor city night, that he desperately hoped she would take the money. Elena found the envelope the next morning. It was so white against the grimy, warped floorboards of the hallway that it seemed to glow. Her heart leaped into her throat. Her first thought was an eviction notice, but it was too thick, too heavy. She snatched it up and locked the door behind her, her fingers trembling. She tore it open over the kitchen sink. Cash, stacks of clean, crisp $50 bills. She fumbled, counting it. $5,000. She dropped the money as if it had burned her. It scattered across the cracked linoleum. This was not a miracle. This was a nightmare. This was him. Mira's words came rushing back. He'll find you. Men like him. They take everything. He had found her. He knew where she lived. This was not a gift. It was a leash, a down payment, a threat. He was telling her that he owned the very air she breathed. She spent the day in a state of vibrating terror. She stared at the money, her mind racing. She could take Lucy and run. But where? He was Dominic Villaro. He owned the city. He would find them before they even reached the bus station. And Lucy was still weak. The new medicine was working, but slowly, to move her now, to drag her out into the cold. No, she couldn't run, but she also couldn't ignore the money. By evening, the apartment was so cold that Lucy had to wear her coat to bed. The ancient, clanking radiator had finally given up, and the landlord had laughed when she called. She looked at the money, then at her sister's pale, sleeping face. The suspicion was a cold knot in her stomach, but the desperation was sharper. She was a rat in a trap, and the trap was lined with cash. She took $200. She paid a man 3 blocks over to come and bleed the radiator, hissing at the ancient piece of junk until hot steam finally rattled through the pipes. The warmth that filled the small apartment was a profound, guilty relief. She bought a new, thick comforter for Lucy's bed. She bought chicken and fresh vegetables and made a soup that smelled of a life they didn't have. She told herself she would put the rest aside, that she would find a way to return it. Dominic, watching from the dark apartment across the street, saw the steam on her windows. He saw her carry the bags of groceries. He saw her, later, sitting at the table, not crying, just staring at the wall. Her face set in hard, defiant lines. He felt a strange, unfamiliar twist of satisfaction. 3 days later, the second envelope appeared. It was identical to the first, pushed under her door in the dead of night. Elena's hands were steady this time, but cold. She was braced for more money, more of this silent, terrifying game. She opened it. There was no cash. There was only a single, heavy, black leather wallet. His wallet, it was empty of cash, but the cards were all there, pristine. Dominic Villaro. A small, choked sound escaped her. This was so much worse than the money. The money had been an abstract show of power. This was personal. This was a direct, pointed message. I know what you did. I have been in your building. I can be here any time I want. He was returning the evidence, closing a loop, and she knew, with sickening certainty, that he was opening another. He wasn't just watching, he was summoning. She sank to the floor, the wallet in her lap. She was terrified, but beneath the terror was a new, cold spark, anger. He was toying with her. He was sitting in his glass tower, pulling her strings, watching her dance, and he thought she was just some pathetic, scared little thief. She would not be his toy. She stood up, her decision made. She could not run. She could not hide. The only path was through. She would go to him. She would give him back his wallet and the $4,800. And she would beg. No, she would not beg. She would apologize. She would face the lion in his den. It was the only move she had left. The Villaro building was a spear of black glass that pierced the downtown sky. The lobby was a cavern of polished marble and silent, intimidating art. Elena, in her threadbare coat and worn sneakers, felt like a ghost. The concierge, a man with a face like a clenched fist, didn't even look at her as she walked to the private elevator. The address from the ID was seared into her memory. Penthouse. She expected the elevator to have a key, to have a guard. Did not. The doors slid open at her touch. She stepped inside, and the doors closed, sealing her in. The ascent was fast, silent, and left her stomach behind. She expected to be met by guards, by men in suits who would frisk her and mock her. The elevator doors opened. She was standing in his living room. The car opened directly into the penthouse. The entire city was spread out before her. A glittering carpet of lights through a wall of glass that must have been 50 feet wide. The room was vast, minimalist and cold, all black leather and chrome and shadows, and he was there. He was not by the door. He was standing by the window, a glass of dark red wine in his hand, as if he had been expecting her all along. He was dressed in a simple black sweater and dark trousers. No suit, no armor. He looked softer, more human, and somehow, that was more terrifying. He turned, slowly. His face was unreadable in the dim light. "Elena," he said. Her name in his voice was a shock. It was low, smooth, and held no trace of anger. It was a statement of fact. Elena's hands flew to her pockets. She pulled out the wallet and the envelope of cash, holding them out like a shield. Her voice was a reedy, trembling thing. "I'm here to return this. All of it. I'm sorry. It was for my sister. She's sick. I needed medicine. I'm so sorry." He didn't move. He just watched her, his head tilted. "I know," he said. Those 2 words hit her harder than a slap. "I know." He knew about Lucy. He hadn't just found her. He had investigated her. "Come in," he said, gesturing with his wine glass. "Or are you planning on apologizing from the elevator?" She stepped out, and the doors slid shut behind her. A final, definitive click. She was trapped. I don't want any trouble," she whispered, her eyes darting to the shadows, still expecting men to emerge. "If I wanted to cause you trouble, Elena, we would not be having this conversation in my home. We would not be having it at all. He walked toward a sleek, modern bar. Wine? No. He poured a second glass anyway and set it on the low glass table between two massive black sofas. Sit. It was a command. She sat, perching on the edge of the cushions, her back rigid. She placed the wallet and the money on the table. The pile of cash looked obscene in the opulent room. He sat opposite her, not looming but relaxed, sinking into the leather. His glass in his hand, he swirled the wine. The silence stretched, thick and heavy. You're not a very good thief, feet wet, he said, his voice laced with a strange, dark amusement. I know, I'm not anything. I just... You are, he interrupted. A terrible thief, but you're a very good pickpocket. The lift was flawless. I've had my pockets picked by professionals in Naples who weren't as clean as you. Your mistake was your target. I didn't know who you were. And if you had... He leaned forward, his dark eyes catching the light. He wasn't just amused, he was intrigued. Would you have done it anyway? Elena stared at him. The truth was, she probably would have. Lucy's cough had been that bad. She swallowed, but said nothing. He smiled, a slow, dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. That's what I thought. He leaned back. You're smart. You found a temporary job as a file clerk. Your grades in college were excellent before you had to drop out. You're responsible for your sister, Lucy, 13 years old, teen. Complications from a bronchial infection. The new medication is expensive. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. I don't like mysteries. Elena, and you were a mystery. He set his glass down. The money. I used $200, she said, her voice shaking. For the heat and food, I'll pay it back. I can clean. I'll do anything, please. I don't want you to clean, he said, the amusement in his voice sharpening into something else. Flirtatious, predatory. And I don't want your money. Then what do you want? She cried, her control finally snapping. Why are you doing this? Why are you terrorizing me? Terrorizing you? He seemed to genuinely consider the word. Is that what this is? I thought it was a recruitment. What? You owe me. Not for the money. The money was a test. You passed. You took only what you needed. You didn't run. You're here. No, you owe me for the wallet. You stole from me. You broke the rules. In my world, that has consequences. She flinched, expecting the violence to finally show, but, he continued, while steepling his fingers, I am a reasonable man, and I have a problem. My legitimate front company, Villaro Imports, is drowning in paperwork. My men are soldiers. They are not clerks. You, on the other hand, are a very good clerk. And you're desperate. What are you saying? I'm offering you a deal. 1 week. You come and work for me. Clean work. You organize my files. You answer my phones. After 1 week, your debt is paid. You walk away. You and Lucy are safe. You never have to see me again. She stared at him. A job. He was offering her a job. It was insane. And if I say no? His smile vanished. You won't. She knew he was right. This was not a choice. This was the only door he had left open for her. 1 week, she said, her voice a dry rasp. 1 week. Clean work. My word, he said, and the way he said it, she believed him, in this, at least. Okay. She started the next day. Villaro Imports was a sterile, modern office on the 20th floor of a downtown building. It looked like any other import-export company, except the men were all too big, and their suits fit too well, and their eyes were too sharp. Marco, his second-in-command, showed her to a desk in a small, glass-walled office. It was piled high with binders and loose-leaf paper. The boss wants this organized, Marco said, his voice full of disdain. She was overwhelmed, but as she started to dig, a strange calm settled over her. This, she understood. Numbers, files, systems. The work was chaotic, disorganized by men who thought with their fists, but the logic was simple. She worked for 12 hours straight, fueled by bad coffee and fear. She created a color-coded system. She found shipping manifests that had been double-billed. By the third day, she had uncovered an accounting error that was costing the company thousands of dollars. She brought it to Marco, her hands shaking. He looked at the discrepancy, then at her, his expression unreadable. He took the file and went straight to Dominic's office. Dominic had been watching her. He had an office in the back, and he found himself spending more and more time there, watching her through the one-way glass partition. He watched her bite her lip when she was concentrating. He watched her rub the back of her neck when she was tired. He watched her argue with the delivery driver about a missing invoice, her voice sharp and clear, until the man, who was twice her size, backed down. His men were impressed. He was unnerved. She was not just a file clerk. She was intelligent. She was capable. She was brave. And she was in his office, in his world. And he found himself thinking about her more than he thought about his business. On Friday night, it was past 10. The office was dark, save for the single lamp on her desk. She was rubbing her temples, her hair unbound, falling in a dark wave over her shoulder. He came out of his office. She jumped, a small, startled gasp, her hand flying to her chest. "It's late," he said, his voice quiet. "I'm almost finished with the quarter-end reports. They can wait. You'll get yourself killed walking home this late." He was already holding her coat, which she had left on a chair. "I can take the subway. I'm driving you." It was not an offer. The ride was silent. The black sedan was like a tomb, insulated from the city. The tension was a living thing. A third person in the car? Elena stared out the window, watching the familiar, poor streets of her neighborhood slide by. He parked in front of her building. The engine idled, a low, powerful hum. She started, reaching for the door handle. His hand closed over hers on the center console. It wasn't an accident. His skin was warm, his palm calloused. It was not a gentle touch. It was a claim. Elena's breath hitched. She could feel the pulse in his wrist, strong and steady. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. The touch lingered. For 1 second, then 2, then 3. It was the most intimate, terrifying thing she had ever felt. She finally snatched her hand back, as if burned. "Don't..." He didn't smirk. He just looked at her, his eyes dark. "I'll walk you to your door." In the dim, flickering light of her hallway, surrounded by the smell of old garbage and neglect, he looked like a king in exile. He stopped at her door, watching her as she fumbled in her pocket for her keys. Her hands were shaking. "Thank you for the ride. And the job. The week is over." "Is it?" he asked, his voice low. She finally got the key in the lock, but didn't turn it. She turned to face him. He was closer than she thought. She had to tilt her head back to look at him. She could see the faint shadow of stubble on his jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes that matched her own. "I held up my end of the deal," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, you did." He was looking at her mouth. She could feel the heat of his gaze. She knew she should open her door, run inside and lock it, but she didn't. She was caught. Her lips parted on a breath she didn't know she was holding. Fear and a strange, dizzying longing. He was dangerous. He was her captor, but he was also the first person who had ever truly seen her. He leaned in, slowly, giving her time to run. She didn't. His scent surrounded her. Soap, wool, and something uniquely him, something metallic and warm. He was inches away. He raised his hand, not to grab, but to touch. His knuckles, rough and calloused, brushed her cheek. It was a feather-light, almost tender gesture that sent a shiver through her entire body. She closed her eyes. He was going to kiss her. She was terrified. She wanted him to... He stopped. His breath fanned her cheek. He was so close. She could feel the heat and power rolling off him. With a low, frustrated sound, he pulled back. His hand dropped from her face, but he didn't step away. He just looked at him, his eyes hooded, his jaw tight. "Good night, Elena," he said, his voice rough. He turned and walked away, his footsteps loud in the silent, shabby hall. Elena stumbled into her apartment, locking and bolting the door. She leaned against it, her entire body shaking, her hand pressed to the cheek he had touched. She was safe. She was free. And she knew, with a terrifying certainty, that she was in more danger now than she had ever been. The week that was supposed to be a singular payment of debt had bled into 2, and then 3. The sharp, clearly defined boundaries Dominic Villaro had drawn around his life were beginning to blur, smudged by the presence of a woman who organized his files with the same ferocity she had used to pick his pocket. The change in the atmosphere at Villaro Imports was subtle at first, like a shift in barometric pressure before a storm. The office, usually a place of hushed tones and rigid discipline, had acquired a strange, new energy. Dominic, the man who was known to fire subordinates for a typo, was seen leaning against the door frame of the file room, listening, just listening. Elena was explaining a new coding system for the shipping manifests, her hands moving in the air to emphasize her points. Dominic was watching her, not with the predatory gaze of a boss, but with the fascinated attention of a man discovering a new color. His lieutenants noticed. Marco, a man built like a vending machine and possessed of about as much emotional range, watched the interaction with a deepening scowl. He saw the way Dominic's shoulders relaxed when Elena walked into the room. He saw the way Dominic checked his watch, not to rush meetings, but to see if it was time to drive her home. "The boss is distracted," Marco muttered one afternoon to Sal, the driver, as they stood by the coffee machine. "He's not distracted," Sal said, glancing toward the glass-walled office where Dominic was handing Elena a cup of tea. Tea, not coffee, because she had mentioned once she preferred Earl Grey. "He's human. It's weird." It unnerved Dominic, too. He found himself making decisions that were uncharacteristically lenient. When a warehouse manager on the South Side was short on a payment, Dominic didn't send a breaker crew. He gave the man an extension. He told himself it was strategic, but deep down, he knew it was because the anger that usually fueled him had been replaced by a strange, humming anticipation of seeing Elena at 5 o'clock. Elena, for her part, was living a double life, by day. She navigated the dangerous currents of Dominic's world, her intelligence earning her a begrudging respect from the men who guarded the hallways. By night, she returned to the drafty apartment, but even that had changed. Lucy was getting better. The steady supply of medication, paid for by the wages Dominic insisted on giving her, wages far above a file clerk's rate, had done its work. The rattle in Lucy's chest was fading, replaced by the clear, bright laughter of a 13-year-old girl. "So," Lucy said one evening, sitting cross-legged on her bed, her cheeks finally showing a hint of pink, "is the handsome man in the black car picking you up tomorrow?" Elena froze while folding laundry. "He's my boss, Lucy. He gives me a ride because it's safe. Mira says he looks like a movie star who plays a vampire." Lucy giggled, teasing. "She says you get all weird when his car pulls up." "I do not get weird," Elena said, throwing a pair of socks at her sister. But her face burned. She did get weird. Every time she saw the sleek black sedan, her heart performed a traitorous, acrobatic leap. She knew who he was. She knew what he was, but the man who insured her sister had heat and medicine. The man who listened to her talk about supply chains as if it were poetry was becoming impossible to separate from the monster Mira had warned her about. The tension between her fear and her attraction came to a head on a Tuesday. Dominic stopped at her desk just as the sun was beginning to set, casting long orange shadows across the office floor. "Dinner," he said. It wasn't a question, but the tone lacked his usual command. It was softer, almost hopeful. Elena looked up from her ledger. "I have to get back to Lucy. Mira is with her. I already checked," Dominic said. "She's making pizza. You are free for 2 hours." "You checked on my sister?" Elena asked, half offended, half relieved. "I like to be thorough. Come, put your coat on." He took her to a place called The Vault, a restaurant built into the basement of an old bank. It was dark, elegant, and smelled of truffle oil and expensive cognac. The maitre d' greeted Dominic with a reverence that bordered on fear, whisking them to a secluded booth in the back, shielded by heavy velvet curtains. For the first hour, it was perfect. Dominic asked her about her life before the stealing, before the poverty. He listened as she talked about her mother, about the books she used to read, about the degree in architecture she had to abandon. He didn't interrupt. He just watched her, his dark eyes reflecting the candlelight, making her feel like the only important thing in the world. "You have a brilliant mind, Elena," he said quietly, pouring her more wine. "You see structures where others see chaos. It is a waste to have you just filing papers. It pays the bills," she said, looking down, "and it keeps Lucy alive. I would keep you both alive," he said. The words hung in the air, heavy and loaded with implication. Before Elena could respond, the curtain to their booth was swept aside. The air in the booth instantly changed. It went from intimate to freezing. A man stood there, shorter than Dominic, with a face scarred by pockmarks and a smile that looked like a rictus of hate. He was flanked by two large men. "Villaro," the man said, his voice like grinding gravel. "Eating well. I see." Dominic didn't stand up. He didn't even look surprised. He slowly picked up his wine glass, took a sip, and set it down. When he finally looked at the man, his eyes were void. The warmth Elena had seen a moment ago was gone, extinguished so completely it was terrifying. "Moretti," Dominic said. His voice was flat, devoid of any inflection. "You are interrupting my dinner. You owe me a conversation, Dominic, about the shipment at the docks. You think you can just push me out of the union contracts?" "I didn't push you," Dominic said calmly. "You fell because you are incompetent. Now leave." "Before I lose my appetite," Moretti's face reddened. He stepped forward, his hand drifting toward his jacket pocket. "You think you're untouchable because you're sitting here with your whore." The silence that followed was absolute. Elena stopped breathing. Dominic stood up. He didn't rush. He unfolded his height slowly, rising like a dark tide. He adjusted his cuffs, apologized to the lady. "I don't think so," Moretti sneered, in a movement so fast Elena almost missed it. Dominic grabbed a steak knife from the table and drove it into the heavy oak wood, mere millimeters from Moretti's hand resting on the tablecloth. The handle vibrated with the force of the impact. Moretti flinched back, stumbling into his bodyguards. "Apologize," Dominic whispered. The sound was more frightening than a scream. It was the sound of death waiting for an excuse. "Sorry," Moretti choked out, his eyes wide. "Get out," Dominic said. "If I see you in this city tonight, I will burn your house down with you inside it." Moretti and his men scrambled away. The restaurant was silent. Dominic pulled the knife from the table, wiped it with his napkin, and sat back down. He looked at Elena. "I apologize for the interruption. The dessert here is excellent." Elena stared at him. She was trembling. She'd just seen the monster. He was cold, calculating, and lethal, and yet he had unleashed that darkness to defend her. "I want to go," she whispered. "Okay," Dominic said immediately. He signaled for the check, threw a stack of bills on the table without counting them, and guided her out, his hand resting protectively on the small of her back. The ride to his penthouse was silent. Elena sat as far away from him as the leather seat allowed. She was reeling. The violence she had witnessed wasn't kinetic. It was the violence of authority, of a man who could end lives with a sentence. When the elevator opened into his penthouse, she walked straight to the window, staring out at the city lights, hugging her arms around herself. She needed to leave. She needed to run, but her feet wouldn't move. "Elena!" Dominic's voice came from behind her. "You threatened to burn him alive," she said, her voice shaking. "He insulted you. Is that how you solve everything?" She turned to face him. "With threats? With knives?" "In my world, yes. It is the only language men like Moretti understand." He walked toward her, stopping a few feet away. "I told you who I was. I never lied to you." "I know," she cried, tears pricking her eyes. "I know who you are. That's the problem. I know who you are, and I'm still here." "What is wrong with me?" Dominic closed the distance. The restraint he had been exercising for weeks, the careful, gentle distance he had maintained, shattered. "There is nothing wrong with you," he rasped. "You are the only real thing in this entire city." He reached for her, and this time, she didn't flinch. She stepped into him. The impact was explosive. Dominic pinned her against the glass wall, his hands tangling in her hair, his mouth crashing down on hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a desperate, starving claim. It tasted of wine and adrenaline and fear. Elena grabbed the lapels of his jacket, pulling him closer, meeting his intensity with her own pent-up emotion. He lifted her easily, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her toward the bedroom. The darkness of the room swallowed them. He laid her on the bed, his body covering hers, a heavy, grounding weight that chased away the cold terror of the restaurant. "Elena!" He whispered against her neck, his voice rough with need. "Tell me to stop. Tell me to leave, and I will." "Don't stop," she breathed, her hands moving over his shoulders, feeling the hard muscle beneath the shirt. "Don't you dare stop." The last barriers fell. Their clothes were discarded in a frenzy of hands and whispered urgencies. When his skin finally touched hers, it was like a brand. The friction was electric. He moved with a control that was agonizing, worshipping her body with his hands and his mouth, making her arch and gasp in the quiet room. It was a fierce, consuming union. Dominic kissed her as if he was drowning, and she was oxygen. He kissed the hollow of her throat, the curve of her shoulder, desperate to taste every inch of her honesty. Elena held on to him, her nails digging into his back, anchoring herself in the storm. For the first time in years, she wasn't the caretaker, the sister, the struggling survivor. She was just a woman, wanted with a terrifying intensity by a dangerous man. When the end came, it left them both breathless and tangled, their hearts hammering in unison against their ribs. Dominic collapsed beside her, pulling the sheet up to cover them. He wrapped an arm around her, pulling her back against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, breathing in her scent. "I have you," he murmured into the darkness. "I have you, and I am never letting anyone touch you again." Elena lay still, her heart slowly returning to a normal rhythm. She felt safe. For the first time in her life, she felt completely, utterly protected. But as the adrenaline faded, reality crept back in. She looked at the expensive silk sheets. She remembered the knife on the table. She remembered Moretti's eyes. She wasn't just a woman in love. She was a target, and by being here, by being with him, she had just painted a target on Lucy's back, too. Moretti had called her his whore. How long before someone decided to get to Dominic through her sister? Dominic's breathing deepened. He was asleep. The most feared man in Harbor City was sleeping peacefully because she was in his arms. Elena carefully, painfully, untangled herself from his embrace. She slipped out of the bed, the cold air hitting her skin like a judgment. She gathered her clothes, dressing in the silence of the room. Her hands shook as she buttoned her blouse. She found a notepad on the nightstand. She took his pen, a heavy, expensive thing, and wrote 4 words. "Don't come back for me." She placed it on the pillow where her head had been. She looked at him one last time. His face was relaxed, younger, stripped of the mask he wore for the world. She wanted to kiss him. She wanted to crawl back into the warmth. Instead, she turned and walked out. She took the service stairs down 40 flights, terrified the elevator chime would wake him. She ran through the lobby and out into the pre-dawn gray of the city. Dominic woke up an hour later. The space beside him was cold. "Elena." Silence. He sat up, panic seizing his chest in a way a gun to the head never could. He saw the paper. He picked it up. "Don't come back for me." The paper crumpled in his fist. A roar of sound built in his throat, a mixture of fury, loss, and a terrible, aching hurt. She had run. After everything, after the way she had looked at him, she had run. He threw the covers off and stormed naked to the phone. He punched a number. "Marco." "Boss, it's 6 a.m. "She's gone." Dominic snarled. "She ran." "The girl?" "Okay, so let her go. It's better this way." "Boss." "No," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "It is not better. You get everyone. You get the street crews. You get the Port Authority. You found her." "Boss, if she wants to leave." "I didn't say punish her," Dominic interrupted, staring at the empty side of the bed, his chest heaving. "I said find her. She thinks she's saving me, or saving herself. I don't care. You find her, and you bring her home. Do you understand? No one touches a hair on her head, but you bring her back to me." On it, Marco said, the line clicking dead. Dominic walked to the window, looking out at the labyrinth of streets below. Somewhere out there, she was running. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. You can't run from this. Elena, he whispered to the city, not now. The city at 6 a.m. was a landscape of cold, blue shadows. Elena ran. She didn't take the subway or a bus. She ran on foot, sticking to alleys and side streets, her heart a cold, hard knot of panic in her chest. Every black sedan she saw made her jump. Every tall man in a dark coat made her duck into a doorway. She was running from Dominic, but she was also running from herself. She had crossed a line. It wasn't just the sex. It was the feeling, the way she had melted into him, the way his protection had felt like a home she had never had. She had seen the monster and the man, and the terrifying truth was that she wanted both. She was terrified of him, but she was more terrified of what she was feeling for him. Men like Dominic Villaro did not love. They possessed. They did not protect. They owned, and everything they owned, everything they touched, was eventually destroyed. She had just made herself, and by extension Lucy, the most vulnerable target in Harbor City. She made it to Mira's apartment just as the sun was beginning to dilute the darkness. Mira, who worked the overnight shift at the diner, was just getting home. She took one look at Elena's wild eyes, her wrinkled clothes from the night before, and the terror rolling off her, and pulled her inside. Elle, what happened? Where's Lucy? She's fine, Elena gasped, sliding down the wall to sit on the floor. I left her with Mrs. Petrov from downstairs. I paid her for 2 days. I was with him. Mira, I was with him. Mira's face went pale. What do you mean? With him? He gave me a job, and I went to his house. I stayed. The confession came out in a ragged whisper. Elena, no. I have to go. I have to get Lucy, and we have to leave the city. He'll find me. He'll what? Mira knelt in front of her. Hurt you. Elena looked at her friend, her eyes swimming in tears. No, she whispered, and this was the most terrifying part of all. That's the problem. He won't hurt me. He was gentle. He was protective, and I think I've fallen in love with him. Mira. Oh, honey, Mira said, her voice full of pity. No, you haven't. You're just scared, and you're confusing that with... You didn't see him, Elena said, her voice hardening. You didn't see the way he looked at me, but I saw him last night. I saw what he's capable of. He threatened to burn a man alive for insulting me. He didn't even raise his voice. She finally broke, burying her face in her hands. Men like him destroy everything they love. It's the only way they know how. I can't let him destroy me. I can't let him get near Lucy. Mira helped her up. Okay, you're right. We'll get your sister. I have about $600 saved. We'll put you on a bus to anywhere. But by the time they got back to Elena's apartment, the black sedan was already there. It was parked across the street, idling, not Dominic, just 2 of his men, their faces like stone. They weren't there to grab her. They were just watching, waiting. Elena pulled Mira back into the vestibule. He's already here. He's got men in my apartment. She was trapped. The entire city had just become his cage. What do we do? Mira whispered. You go home, Elena said, her mind racing. You were never here. You don't know me. I can't let him know I have a friend. He'll use you. Elle, I'm not leaving you. Yes, you are. Go, please. Elena slipped out the back of the building. She couldn't get to Lucy. She couldn't go home. She couldn't even leave the city. She was in his territory, and the walls were closing in. She went to the only place she could think of, a place with no connection to her, a place where she could be invisible. The free clinic was on the west side, where she had taken Lucy once when she had a fever. It was a place of ghosts, full of people who didn't want to be found. She told the head nurse she would do anything. She cleaned floors. She washed bedpans. She filed charts in their overflowing, chaotic paper system. She slept in an empty supply closet, her coat bundled up as a pillow, and ate leftover sandwiches from the break room. She worked for 12 hours a day, keeping her head down, her face turned away from the windows, praying that the sheer misery of the place would be enough to hide her. She lasted for 4 days. Meanwhile, Dominic Villaro was unraveling. The penthouse was a war room. His men, who were used to his cold, lethal calm, were now terrified of him. He was a storm trapped in a man's body. He hadn't slept. He hadn't eaten. He stood at the window, still in the same black trousers he'd been wearing when she left, pacing a line in the expensive carpet. "You found anything?" he snapped as Marco entered. "Boss, we've got feelers out everywhere. The bus stations, the train stations. Nothing. She hasn't used her name. Hasn't used a card. Because she's not leaving," Dominic roared, slamming his fist on the glass table. "She's here. She's hiding. She's running around on foot thinking she can hide from me in my own city." "Dom," Marco said, attempting to be reasonable. "She's a civilian. She's scared. Maybe you should just let her cool off." Dominic turned, his eyes black with a fury that was deeper than anger. It hurt. "She stole my wallet. Marco, I let it go. She worked for me. She looked at me and then she ran. She stole more than my wallet. She stole my goddamn peace. She's the first bit of peace I've had in 20 years. And she just walked out the door with it." "What are you going to do when you find her?" "I'm going to bring her home," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "And if she doesn't want to come?" Dominic's jaw clenched. "She will." It was a small, insignificant detail that finally gave her away. Sal, his driver, was talking to one of the street-level guys who ran the numbers in the West Side. The guy mentioned the clinic was short-staffed, that the head nurse had hired some new girl off the books who worked like a demon and slept in the closet. Sal told Marco. Marco told Dominic. Dominic was in his car before Marco had finished the sentence. The clinic smelled of bleach, sickness, and despair. It was crowded, the fluorescent lights humming over the rows of coughing, miserable people. Dominic walked in, and the entire waiting room fell silent. He was a creature from another world. His suit was worth more than the clinic's entire monthly budget. His anger was a palpable force, pushing the very air out of the room. The head nurse at the desk, a tired woman with a steel spine, stood up. "Can I help you?" "I'm looking for Elena Marlowe." "We don't have any patients by that." "She's not a patient," Dominic said, his voice low. "She works here. Black hair, dark eyes. Looks like she's about to be hit by a truck." The nurse's eyes narrowed. "I don't know anyone by that name." Dominic leaned over the desk, his voice a sibilant hiss. "I own this building. I own the pharmacy that stocks your shelves. I own the company that hauls away your medical waste. Now, I am going to ask you one more time. Where is she?" The nurse paled and pointed a trembling finger down a hallway. "The utility closet. At the end. She was stocking shelves." Dominic moved, his long strides eating up the hallway. He didn't knock. He ripped the door open. Elena was on a small stepladder, her back to him, counting boxes of sterile gauze. She was wearing scrubs that were 2 sizes too big, her hair pulled back in a messy knot. She froze, her shoulders tensing. She knew. She knew without even turning around. She stepped down from the ladder, her body rigid. She turned. Slowly. Her face was gaunt. There were dark, bruised circles under her eyes. She looked broken. The sight of her, so small and exhausted in this miserable, gray room, extinguished his rage and replaced it with a suffocating, aching need. "Elena," he breathed. "Go away, Dominic," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Go away." He stepped into the tiny closet, forcing her to back up until her spine hit the wall. He was close enough to feel the heat coming off her, to smell the scent of antiseptic soap and fear. "You run from my bed. You leave a forward note like a coward. You hide in a closet. And you tell me to go away?" He grabbed her wrist. His grip was steel. "What did you think was going to happen? You thought I'd just let you go. After that?" The touch, the anger, the sheer possession in his voice broke the dam of her fear. A wild, furious energy surged through her. "Let go of me," she yelled, yanking her arm. He wouldn't release her. She used her free hand to shove him hard in the chest. "Let me go. I am not your property." He stumbled back a step, stunned by her violence. "What are you doing?" "I'm not your file clerk. I'm not your whore. I am not something you get to find and keep," she screamed. her voice echoing in the small space. She was crying now. Hot, angry tears. "I don't belong to you. You came into my home," he yelled back, his own control snapping. "You came to my office. You slept in my bed. You looked at me. And then you ran. I ran to save my life. I ran to save my sister. Don't you understand? You put a target on me. On us. That man in the restaurant Moretti. That's your world. And I am not going to be the woman who gets my sister killed because you like the way I file your papers. I would never let anything happen to you," he roared, grabbing her by the shoulders. "You can't promise that," she sobbed, hitting his chest with her fists. "You don't own the world. You own a dark, bloody corner of it, and anything that gets too close to you gets bled on. I won't be that. Dominic, I won't." He shook her, his face inches from hers, his eyes wild with a pain and confusion that mirrored her own. "Do you think I care about that? Do you think I care about Moretti? You think I can't handle him?" He let go of her shoulders only to cage her, his hands slamming against the wall on either side of her head. "You stole from me. Elena. The first time, it was my wallet. Fine, I wrote it off, but you stole my peace. I haven't slept since you left. I can't breathe in my own house. You took the one thing that made any sense and you ran with it. You can't have it. You can't just take that and then hide from me." His chest was heaving. Her back was pressed against the cold cinder block. They were both breathing the same small, shared space, their breath mingling. The silence that fell was louder than the screaming. It was a vacuum, filled with their ragged breathing and the thud of their hearts. Elena's tears were still tracking down her face, but the fight had left her. She just looked at him, her eyes wide and broken. "You stole my peace," he whispered again, his voice cracking. He rested his forehead against hers. "Give it back." "I can't," she breathed. "Then this," he kissed her. It was not the slow, desperate claiming from his penthouse. This was a collision. It was raw, desperate, and full of all the anger and fear they had just unleashed. It was a kiss that said, "I hate you for this, and I need you to live." His lips were rough, demanding, crushing hers. He tasted like rage and coffee and an expensive, dark loneliness. Elena's hands, which had been pushing him away, fisted in the front of his suit jacket. She kissed him back, a sob catching in her throat. She kissed him with all her fear, all her hopelessness, all her terrible, stupid love for this impossible, dangerous man. His arm snaked around her waist, yanking her flush against him, lifting her from the floor. Her back was pressed against the cold brick. He was a furnace against her, hard and unyielding. His hand tangled in her hair, pulling her head back as he deepened the kiss, his tongue claiming her mouth with a desperate, plundering need. It was messy. It was raw. It was two people drowning and pulling each other under. There was no thought. There was only the scrape of brick against her back, the heat of his skin, the taste of him, and the desperate, frantic clutch of their hands. It was a raw, primal need to be closer, to erase the 4 days of separation. When he finally broke the kiss, they were both gasping, their foreheads pressed together. "You are not," he panted, his eyes closed, "leaving me. Ever. Again. Dominic," she breathed, her body still trembling. "Lucy, I know." He finally opened his eyes. The wildness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard certainty. "I know." He slowly, reluctantly, let her slide down his body until her feet touched the floor. He didn't let her go. He just held her, his arms wrapped around her waist, his face buried in her neck. "I will put you somewhere safe," he said, his voice muffled by her hair. "You and Lucy, somewhere far from this, somewhere no one can find you. Not Moretti, not anyone." "Dominic, I can't. I won't be your woman in a cage," she whispered, her hands flat against his chest. He pulled back just enough to look her in the eyes. "It won't be a cage. It will be a fortress, just until I fix this, until I clean this world up enough so you can breathe in it. I'll put you and Lucy somewhere safe. I'll guard you myself if I have to. No one from my world will ever touch you. I swear." She searched his face. She saw the desperation, the exhaustion, and a terrifying, absolute sincerity. He meant it. "I'll go," she said, her voice shaking. "I'll go, but on one condition. Anything. No more secrets. You told me you never lied to me. I need to know. I need to know everything. If I'm going to be in this fortress, I'm not going to be in the dark." He looked at her for a long time. She was asking him to dismantle the very walls he had built his empire on. "I swear it," he said. And in that moment, he meant it more than any vow he'd ever made. The house was a sprawling, mid-century structure perched on a wooded ridge at the very edge of the city limits. It was made of stone and timber, designed to disappear into the tree line. To the casual observer, it was simply a quiet residence for a wealthy recluse. To Elena, it was a fortress disguised as a home. The neighbors were quiet men who drove nondescript sedans and spent a great deal of time trimming hedges that didn't need trimming. They were Dominic's best men, a perimeter of lethal loyalty that allowed Elena to breathe without checking the locks every 5 minutes. For the first week, the silence of the place was jarring. After the sirens and shouting matches of her tenement building, the rustle of wind in the pines felt loud. But slowly, the tension that had knotted Elena's shoulders for years began to unravel. Dominic was rarely gone for long. He ran his empire from a secure study in the West Wing, but he emerged with a frequency that surprised her. Elena began to see a version of him that the city never saw, a version that perhaps even Dominic had forgotten existed. It started with the kitchen cabinet. One morning, while reaching for a mug, the hinge on the cabinet door gave a groan and snapped, leaving the door hanging crookedly. Elena instinctively flinched, waiting for the curse, the irritation, the sign that she was an inconvenience. Dominic, who was drinking coffee at the island, simply set his cup down. He walked over, examined the hinge, and rolled up the sleeves of his white dress shirt. "Do we have a toolbox?" he asked, not looking at her. "I think there's one in the mudroom," Elena stammered. He spent the next 20 minutes fixing it. He didn't call a contractor. He didn't order a subordinate to handle it. He knelt on the tile floor, screwdriver in hand, focused and quiet. When he finished, he tested the door. It closed with a solid, satisfying click. He looked up at her, a smudge of grease on his cheek, and gave her a small, boyish smile of accomplishment. "Good as new," he said. Elena felt a lump form in her throat. It was such a small thing, a mundane domestic repair, but it shattered the image of the untouchable Mafia Don more effectively than any grand gesture could have. Then there was Lucy. Lucy was enchanted by the house, but mostly she was enchanted by Dominic. She didn't see the predator. She saw the man who bought her the warm coat and the books. One rainy afternoon, Elena walked into the living room to find Lucy sitting on the rug, a thick adventure novel in her lap. Dominic was sitting in the leather armchair, reading aloud. He was reading a character voice, a gruff pirate captain, and Lucy was giggling. Dominic Valero, the man who could silence a room with a glance, was doing voices for a 13-year-old girl. He looked up as Elena entered, and for a second he looked embarrassed, clearing his throat and returning to his normal baritone. But the softness in his eyes remained. The most surreal moment came on a Sunday morning. Elena woke to the smell of burning toast. She rushed to the kitchen, expecting a fire, only to find Dominic staring critically at a frying pan. "I thought," he said, gesturing with a spatula as if it were a weapon, "that eggs were supposed to be simple. The eggs were a disaster, browned on the edges, runny in the middle, and scattered with shell fragments. The toast was black. I gave the staff the day off," he admitted, looking defeated. "I wanted to make breakfast." Elena laughed. It was a genuine bubbling sound that surprised them both. She walked over, took the spatula from his hand, and kissed his cheek. "Sit down, Dominic. You protect the city. I'll protect the eggs." They ate the salvaged meal in the sun-drenched breakfast nook. It was awkward, quiet, and fiercely intimate. It felt like a life they could have had, if the world were different, but the world was not different, and the shadow of who he was always lingered. One evening, a storm knocked out the power. Dominic lit a fire in the massive stone hearth, and they sat on the rug, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Lucy was asleep in her room down the hall. "You promised," Elena said softly, staring into the fire. No secrets. Dominic swirled the amber liquid in his glass. He looked tired. The domestic peace had softened his features, but the weight of his history was still there, etched in the lines around his eyes. Ask, he said. Why you? She asked. You're not cruel. I've seen you with Lucy. I've seen you fix a cabinet. How did you become him? Dominic took a long drink. I wasn't born this way. Elena, I was a street kid. I ran numbers to pay for my father's debts. I was smart, and I was fast. The old boss, a man named Salvi, took me in. He treated me like a son. He stared into the flames, his voice growing cold. I trusted him. I gave him everything. My loyalty, my time, my blood. And when the police started closing in, he needed a scapegoat. He set me up. He planted evidence in my apartment and tipped off the precinct. I spent 3 years in a cell waiting for a trial that never happened because the witnesses started disappearing. Elena reached out, covering his hand with hers. His skin was cold. I learned in that cell that loyalty is a lie, unless you are the one holding the leash. He continued. When I got out, I didn't go to the police. I went to Salvi. I took his organization apart, piece by piece. I didn't do it with anger. I did it with precision. By the time I walked into his office, he had no men left. He was just an old man alone in a room. And you killed him, Elena whispered. No, Dominic said. I exiled him. I took his city, his money, and his name. I left him to die poor and forgotten. That is a worse death for a man like him. He turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. I became ruthless because I had to be. To survive, I had to be colder than they were, until now. He looked at her, the firelight reflecting in his dark eyes. Until you... Elena squeezed his hand, her heart aching for the boy he had been and the man he had become. She believed him. She saw the cracks in the armor, and she wanted to fill them with light. A few nights later, Elena was sorting through the few boxes they had managed to bring from the apartment. Mostly it was Lucy's things, old drawings, clothes, and a small tin box of keepsakes. Dominic came in, leaning against the doorframe, watching her. I found this, Elena said, smiling sadly. She held up a Polaroid photograph. The colors were faded, shifting toward magenta with age. It's the only picture I have of my mother where she's smiling. Dominic walked over, sitting on the edge of the bed beside her. Show me. Elena handed him the photo. She was beautiful. Tough, though. She worked 3 jobs. She used to tell me that we don't look at our feet. We look at the horizon. Dominic looked at the photo. The world stopped. The breath left his lungs in a sharp, audible rush. The color drained from his face so rapidly that Elena thought he might faint. His hand, holding the small square of paper, began to tremble. Dominic? Elena touched his arm. What's wrong? He couldn't speak. He was staring at the woman in the photo. She was younger than he remembered, her hair darker, but the eyes, fierce, protective, defiant, were unmistakable. He was transported back 15 years. He was 22 years old, bleeding out in an alleyway after a deal gone wrong. Sirens wailing in the distance. The police were sweeping the block. He couldn't move. He was going to die or go to prison for life. And then, a woman opened the service door. She hadn't screamed. She hadn't run. She had looked at him, seen the blood, and seen the boy beneath it. She had dragged him inside, hidden him in a laundry chute, and lied to the police when they hammered on the door. She had stitched his side with a sewing kit and given him water. He had left before dawn, leaving a stack of bloody cash that she probably burned. He never asked her name. He was too focused on his own survival, on his own rise. He had left her behind in the violence he helped create. I know her, Dominic whispered, his voice sounding like it was coming from underwater. What? Elena frowned, confused. How? She died 6 years ago. She was a waitress. She saved my life, Dominic said, lifting his eyes to Elena's. The look on his face was a mixture of horror and awe. 15 years ago, the 4th Street raids, I was shot. She hid me. She risked everything for a stranger. Elena stared at him, her mouth opening in shock. That she told me about a boy. She said she helped a boy who had eyes like a wolf. She said he looked lost. Dominic choked out. I was lost. He looked from the photo to Elena. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he was trying so desperately to save, was the daughter of the only person who had ever shown him selfless kindness. And he had let that woman die in poverty while he built a throne of gold. "I owe her my life," Dominic said, his voice breaking, "and I let her down. I never went back. I never checked on her. Dominic, you couldn't have known. I should have known." He stood up, pacing the room, raking his hands through his hair. "I am the reason the city is the way it is. I am the reason she struggled, and now you. It's not a coincidence. Elena, it's a debt I can never repay." He looked at her with a vulnerability that broke her heart. "I am not worthy of you. I'm standing here because your mother had mercy on a monster." "You're not a monster," Elena said fiercely, standing and grabbing his face in her hands. "You're the man who is saving her daughters. That pays the debt. Dominic, that pays it." He closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers, shaking with the weight of the revelation. The moment was shattered by the vibration of his phone on the dresser. Dominic pulled away, composing himself instantly, the mask slipping back into place. He answered it. "Marco." "Boss." Marco's voice was tight. "We have a problem at the port. Customs is holding the shipment. They're asking for you personally. If you don't come down, they're seizing the containers." Dominic frowned. It was sloppy, routine, but he couldn't risk the exposure. "I'm on my way." He hung up and turned to Elena. "I have to go. 2 hours. Stay inside. The guards are outside." "I'll be fine," she promised. "Go." He kissed her, hard and desperate, as if he sensed the changing tides. "I love you," he said. It was the first time he had said it. Then he was gone. Dominic drove fast, his mind racing between the image of Elena's mother and the problem at the docks. But as he neared the port, a cold feeling settled in his gut. It was too easy. Customs didn't call at 10 at night. Marco's voice had been off. He dialed the number for the lead guard at the safe house. It rang and rang and rang. Dominic slammed on the brakes, the tires screaming against the asphalt. He whipped the car around, ignoring the honking horns, and floored it back toward the edge of the city. Marco hadn't called about customs. Marco, his second in command, the man he had trusted with his life, had made a calculation. He saw Elena as a weakness, a vulnerability that would destroy the empire. He had given the location to Moretti, a peace offering, a trade, Dominic's weakness for the stability of the organization. Back at the house, Elena was in the kitchen making tea when she heard the sound. It wasn't a knock. It was a soft, wet thud, like a heavy sack of flour hitting the porch, then another. The guards. She didn't scream. The survival instinct that had kept her alive on the streets kicked in. She dropped the mug. It shattered, the sound deafening in the silence, and sprinted down the hall. "Lucy!" she hissed, bursting into her sister's room. Lucy sat up, groggy. "Elle, get up, now!" Elena grabbed her arm, dragging her out of bed. She pulled her into the hallway, to the linen closet. She ripped up the bottom panel of the floorboards, revealing the crawl space Dominic had shown her on the first day. "Get in," Elena commanded, her voice shaking but firm. "Elena, I'm scared." "I know, get in. Go all the way to the back. Don't make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do not make a sound." She shoved Lucy down into the dark hole and replaced the boards. She threw a rug over it and a laundry basket on top. Then she turned to face the hallway. The front door exploded inward with a crash of splintering wood. Elena ran back to the kitchen. She grabbed the biggest knife from the block. She backed into the corner, putting herself between the intruders and the hallway that led to Lucy. 3 men entered. They were not wearing masks. They were Moretti's men. She recognized one from the restaurant. "Well, well," the lead man sneered, stepping over the shattered ceramic of her mug. "The boss wasn't lying. Pretty little thing." "Get out," Elena said, holding the knife out. Her hand was shaking, but her eyes were deadly. "Where's the kid?" the man asked, looking around. "We were told to take both." "She's not here," Elena lied. "She's with Dominic." "Liar!" The man lunged. Elena slashed out. The blade caught his arm, slicing through his jacket. He roared in pain and backhanded her. The force of the blow sent her crashing into the glass cabinets. The pane shattered, raining shards down on her. She fell to the floor, the knife skittering away. She scrambled to get up, but a heavy boot slammed into her ribs, pinning her down. She cried out, breathless. "Check the rooms," the man growled to the others, pressing his weight onto her chest. "I'll handle this one." "No!" Elena screamed, clawing at his leg. Suddenly, the night outside was ripped apart by the sound of a car engine roaring up the driveway, followed by the screech of metal. Gunshots, 3 of them, rapid, precise. Pop, pop, pop. The 2 men who had started down the hallway stopped. The front door, already broken, was kicked fully off its hinges. Dominic Villaro stood in the frame. He was not the man who had fixed the cabinet. He was not the man who had read to Lucy. He was death incarnate. His suit was disheveled. His eyes were black voids, and in his hand was a matte black handgun. The man on top of Elena reached for his weapon. Dominic didn't hesitate. He fired once. The man on top of Elena jerked violently backward, collapsing off her in a heap. The other 2 men raised their guns. Dominic moved with a terrifying fluidity. He dropped to one knee, firing 2 shots. One man fell. The other returned fire, the bullet smashing into the wall inches from Dominic's head. Dominic didn't flinch. He adjusted his aim and fired again. Silence fell. It had taken less than 10 seconds. Dominic stood up. He cleared the room with a sweep of his gun, checking corners. "Elena?" His voice was a raw, terrified sound. Elena was pushing herself up from the glass-strewn floor. Her arm was bleeding heavily where a large shard of glass had sliced her skin. Her face was bruised, but she was alive. "Lucy!" she gasped, pointing down the hall. "She's in a crawl space." Dominic rushed to her. He dropped his gun and fell to his knees, sliding in the glass to get to her. He grabbed her face, checking her eyes, his hands shaking violently. "I'm here," he choked out. "I'm here." He scooped her up, ignoring the blood soaking into his shirt, and carried her to the hallway. He kicked the laundry basket aside and ripped up the floorboards. "Lucy!" A small, terrified sob came from the darkness. Lucy crawled out, covered in dust, shaking uncontrollably. Dominic pulled them both into his arms. He sat on the floor of the ruined hallway, surrounded by the bodies of the men he had killed, clutching the 2 sisters to his chest. He looked at Elena's arm, at the blood dripping onto the floor. He looked at the terror in Lucy's eyes. His expression crumbled. The stoic mask, the iron control, the ruthlessness, it all disintegrated. He buried his face in Elena's neck, and a deep, wrenching sob tore through him. "I'm sorry," he wept, rocking them. "I'm so sorry." Elena held him with her good arm, pressing her cheek against his hair. She looked at the carnage around them, then at the man weeping in her arms. The fortress had been breached. The secret was out. But as she held him, she knew that the man holding her was no longer just a boss fighting for a territory. He was a father and a husband fighting for his life, and that made him more dangerous than any army Moretti could send. The new safe house was not a house. It was a bunker, a converted Cold War facility dug into the side of a mountain 3 hours north of Harbor City. The front was a modest, windowless stone facade, but behind the reinforced steel door was a self-contained world of quiet. Insulated rooms, filtered air, and enough supplies to last a year. There were no neighbors, only miles of untouched forest. It was the most secure place in Dominic's arsenal. It was also a prison. Dominic drove them there himself in the dead of night, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He had stitched Elena's arm on the kitchen table of a small hunting cabin he used as a way station, his hands surprisingly steady as he disinfected the wound. He had worked in silence, his jaw clenched, his eyes never meeting hers. The guilt was a physical presence, a poison in the air. He was furious at Marco, at Moretti, but the depth of his self-loathing was a bottomless, black pit. He had sworn to protect her, and he had failed so catastrophically that he had almost gotten her and her sister killed. For the first few days in the bunker, they existed in a state of suspended animation. Lucy, traumatized by the attack, retreated into a quiet shell, spending her days drawing in a sketchbook Dominic had provided. Elena, her arm in a sling, moved like a ghost, her body aching, her mind replaying the sound of the glass shattering, the sight of Dominic's cold efficiency as he ended 3 lives. Dominic did not leave them. He sat at a large communications desk in the main room, a bank of satellite phones and computer monitors in front of him. He was dismantling his own life, and the life of the man who had betrayed him. Elena watched him. He spoke in a low, clipped monotone, his voice devoid of all emotion. It was a different kind of violence, the violence of an emperor signing execution orders. "He's not to be touched," he said to someone on the other end of a secure line. "He's to be stripped, his accounts, his properties, his men, everything. I want him on a cargo ship to Macau by midnight with nothing but the clothes he's wearing. If he ever sets foot on this continent again, you have my permission to end him." He was exiling Marco. The man who had been his second, his most trusted lieutenant, was being erased. "And Moretti?" Dominic's voice went even colder. He listened for a moment. "No, not his family. Just him. I want his operation cut out, root and stem. I want him ruined. I want him begging for a deal. And when he begs, you tell him no." He was methodically, brutally cleaning the house. He was stepping back from the violence. But first, he was ending the war he had allowed to touch his family. After 3 days, the calls stopped. Dominic shut down the monitors. He sat in silence, staring at the blank screens. He had not slept. He had barely eaten. Elena walked over and placed a cup of tea on the desk in front of him. Her arm was throbbing, but she didn't care. He looked up at her, and the mask was gone. His eyes were haunted, exhausted, and full of a shame so profound it made her heart ache. "You're bleeding," he said, his voice rough. He gestured to her bandage, where a small red-pink stain had begun to spread. "It's fine," she said. "It's not fine," he snapped, standing. "Nothing about this is fine." He went to the first aid kit, his hands shaking slightly as he pulled out new gauze. "Sit." She sat on the edge of the sofa, and he knelt in front of her, unwrapping the bandage. The cut was long and deep, but it was clean. He worked carefully, his touch surprisingly gentle. "He was my most trusted man," Dominic said, his voice quiet, almost to himself. "Marco, I knew him for 20 years. I would have trusted him with my life. You trusted him with mine, what way?" Elena said, not unkindly. "And he saw me as a weakness." Dominic's hands stilled. "You're not a weakness." "I know," Elena said. "I'm the only thing that makes you strong enough to be weak." He looked up at her, his dark eyes searching her face. "I am so sorry. Elena, for the glass, for fear, for all of this." "I know," she said, echoing his own words from his penthouse, what felt like a lifetime ago. She let the silence settle. Then she spoke. "There's more. Dominic. More to the story about my mother." He finished taping the new bandage, his gaze fixed on his work. "Go on. You were a story she told me, before she got sick. Not you by name, just the wolf-eyed boy. She hid you. She patched you up, and then you left, and she never saw you again." "I should have gone back," he whispered, his eyes squeezing shut. "She didn't want you to," Elena said. "She was terrified you would. She said you brought the sirens with you. After you left, she was different. Scared, she started locking the doors in a new way. She stopped letting us play in the alley." Dominic's face was pale. "She worked 3 jobs to keep us fed, to keep us safe from the world you were building, the world you and men like Salvi created. She got sick. It started small, a cough, but she couldn't afford to take time off. She couldn't afford the medicine, because men like you were squeezing the city dry, making it impossible for people like us to breathe." She was not being accusatory. She was just stating the facts, the truth she had lived. By the time I was old enough to help, she was already too weak. She died in that same cold apartment, in that same bad neighborhood, because the world was too hard for her. And I was left alone to raise Lucy. I had to drop out of school. I had to work in places that made my skin crawl. And I started to hate it. I hated the city. I hated the men in their dark cars who never looked at us. I hated the monsters who were allowed to thrive as good people while my mother just died." She took a breath, her voice trembling. And then I was so desperate, so full of that hate and that fear for Lucy, that I did the one thing she always told me not to do. I targeted one of those men. I stole from you. And it turns out the monster I hated was the same boy my mother saved. Dominic did not move. He was completely, utterly still. The weight of her words had landed. He was silenced. This was the truth that had been hiding under his skin since he saw that photograph. His entire rise to power, his empire, his name, it was all built on the foundation of a single, selfless act of kindness from a woman he had, in his ambition, left behind. And he had not just failed to repay his debt, he had actively, systemically, contributed to the suffering of her family. He had become the very system, the very darkness that had crushed her. Elena watched him, her heart breaking. He was not a monster. He was just a man who had made 1,000 choices and was only now seeing the cost. A single tear tracked down Dominic's cheek. He didn't wipe it away. He didn't make a sound. He just broke. Silent tears streamed from his eyes, a testament to the pain that was too deep for sobs. He was the king of a ruined city, and he had just realized his crown was made from the bones of the only person who had ever been truly good to him. Elena slid off the sofa and onto her knees in front of him. She cupped his face in her hands, her thumbs wiping away the tears. "It's okay," she whispered. "It's okay. You didn't know." He shook his head, a violent, negative motion, still silent. "You're not that boy anymore," she said, her voice fierce. "And you are not the man who left her. You are the man who came back for her daughters. You are the man who is weeping for her. That's enough. You are enough." She pulled him, and he went, collapsing against her. He buried his face in her shoulder, his body shaking with the force of his silent grief, and Elena held him, her good arm wrapped around his neck, her other hand stroking his hair, as he finally mourned. That night, the bunker was quieter than ever. Lucy was asleep. The world outside was a distant, irrelevant hum. Elena came out of the shower, her hair damp, wearing one of Dominic's soft t-shirts. She found him standing in the main room, just staring at the wall. He turned as she entered. He looked hollowed out. He had washed his face, but his eyes were red-rimmed and raw. He walked to her, not with his usual confidence, but with a hesitant, almost fragile step. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers tracing the bruise on her cheek, a faint, dark mark left by Moretti's man. "He hurt you," he whispered, "because of me." "And you saved me," she whispered back, "because of you." He leaned his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to be the man you deserve." He breathed. I am made of all the things you hate." "No," she said, her hands finding his waist, her fingers slipping under his shirt to feel the warm skin of his back. "You're made of the man who fixed my cabinet, the man who read to my sister, the man who just cried for my mother. That's the man I'm holding?" He kissed her. It was not a kiss of passion or of desperation. It was a kiss of apology. It was slow and tender and full of a reverence that made her knees weak. His lips were soft, asking for permission, not taking. She answered him by opening her mouth, by pulling him closer, by showing him that he was forgiven. He lifted her, and she wrapped her legs around him, not in a frenzy, but in a slow, deliberate embrace. He carried her to the bedroom, the only light coming from the emergency lamps in the hallway. He laid her on the bed and followed her down, his body a warm, protective weight. They made love with a tenderness that was more emotionally charged than any violence. Every touch was an atonement. Every slow, deliberate kiss on her skin, her scars, her neck, was a promise. He mapped her body with his hands and his mouth, as if learning a new language, a language of care instead of control. And when he finally entered her, it was a slow, sacred joining, a unity. He watched her face in the dim light, his eyes never leaving hers. She saw in them not a king, or a boss, or a monster, but just Dominic. Her name is Dominic. It was healing, a quiet, profound, and absolute surrender. The next few weeks were a blur of change. Dominic was on the phone constantly, but the conversations were different. He was with lawyers, with accountants, with developers. He was liquidating his import business. He was selling off his less-than-legal holdings. He was, brick by brick, dismantling the empire of the past and redirecting its vast resources into legitimate enterprises. One day, he was looking at architectural blueprints. "What's that?" Elena asked, leaning over his shoulder. "A community center," he said, tapping the plans. "On the west side, with a free clinic and a daycare. It's being built on the block where your mother lived." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She kissed him, her heart so full she thought it might burst. When they finally emerged from the bunker 2 months later, Harbor City was a different place. Moretti was gone. Marco was gone. The old guard was gone. The city felt quieter. Dominic took them not to the penthouse, but to a new house. A real house, with a garden and windows that let in the sun. He offered Elena a choice. "It's done," he said, standing with her on the porch, watching Lucy chase a butterfly. "It's all clean. The businesses are legitimate. I've set up a trust for you and Lucy. It's enough to go anywhere in the world. You can have any life you want. You are free. You have my word." He was offering her the out he had promised. Elena looked at him, at the man who had terrified her, employed her, protected her, and loved her, the man who had faced the truth of his past and allowed it to change him. She stepped into his arms, resting her head on his chest. "I have a question." "Anything," he said, his arms closing around her, his voice tight. "This new life," she said, looking up at him. "Is there room in it for a file clerk with a background in architecture?" Relief and a blinding, brilliant joy washed over his face. He kissed her, a deep, smiling, promising kiss. "I was hoping," he murmured against her lips, "to make you a partner." Months passed. The house became a house. Lucy's laughter filled the halls. She was back in school, healthy and bright. Elena had an office, and she was designing the new community center. Her dream finally, impossibly, realized. One late spring afternoon, Dominic stood with Elena in the garden, watching Lucy, now a lanky, strong 14-year-old, run through the grass. He took Elena's hand, the one without a bandage, the one that bore no scars. "She's happy," he said, his voice quiet. "We're happy," Elena corrected. He turned to her, his dark eyes clear and free of the old shadows. "Build a life with me, Elena, a real one. Marry me, be my wife, my partner, my peace." Elena smiled, the tears in her eyes not from sadness, but from a profound, settled joy. "Yes, always, yeah." Dominic pulled her close, his heart full. He looked up, past the garden, toward the distant, hazy skyline of Harbor City. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. He was no longer the king of that city, the man who ruled its shadows with an iron fist. He was just a man, standing in the sun, holding the hand of the woman who had stolen his wallet, and in doing so, had given him back his soul. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We truly hope you enjoyed this journey. We would love to know where in the world you are listening from, so please drop a comment and let us know. If you like stories like this, please consider subscribing to our channel, Mafia Romance Stories, for new content every week. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Dominic and Elena, so please share them with us in English. Your support means the world to us.